Ruth, an elegant, powerful woman, lives a life of luxury surrounded by handsome young lovers. But beneath her beauty lies a chilling secret. Her wealth is tied to dark rituals and the mysterious disappearance of her sugar boys. When a determined young man named Kelvin enters her mansion undercover, he unravels a terrifying web of sacrifices, secrets, and spiritual power. What begins as a quest for survival turns into a battle for justice. This is the story of betrayal, courage, and the haunting legacy of a woman once worshipped and feared. Sit back, relax, and find out what happened in this wonderful story.
In the heart of Easy Allah, a serene village nestled between lush green hills and whispering rivers, lived a woman whose name sparked awe and unease. Ruth. Her mansion towered over every other building in the village, a structure of white marble and glass, guarded by electric gates and surveillance that would rival a military base. Ruth was not only the wealthiest person in Easy Allah, but also the most feared. She was young, strikingly beautiful, and extravagantly rich, a combination that made her the obsession of many and the envy of most. But beneath her radiant exterior was a chilling mystery that had haunted the village for years. Ruth had a peculiar way of living. She detested the idea of marriage, calling it a cage meant for the weak. Instead, she entertained herself with a parade of sugar boys. Young, handsome men she picked like clothes from a luxury boutique. Each man she chose would suddenly be seen driving expensive cars, wearing designer clothes, and traveling across continents. For a while, they lived like kings, bathing in her wealth, but there was always a catch. Ruth treated them like servants in disguise, making them cook, clean, wash, and attend to her every whim. When they failed to please her, she humiliated them, sometimes even in front of her domestic staff or random visitors. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished. Every sugar boy Ruth dated went missing after a few months. There was no trace, no note, no goodbye, not even a cent left behind. Families of these men cried out, asking questions, filing reports, and trying to confront Ruth, but nothing ever came out of it. The police seemed mute, the courts never moved. Rumors began to spread that Ruth's money didn't just buy luxury, it bought silence, and so Easy Allah lived in tension, watching her mansion like a haunted palace while she roamed free like a queen untouched by justice. These stories surrounding Ruth grew darker with every disappearance. Though none had proof, whispers traveled faster than light across the community. Mothers warned their sons to steer clear of her, while the desperate ones, driven by poverty, silently prayed to catch her eye. Ruth became more than a person. She became a myth, a cautionary tale, and a mystery wrapped in satin sheets and blood money. Despite the rumors, Ruth's allure never waned. She rode through town in gold-rimmed jeeps, dressed in flowing Italian silk gowns and diamond-studded shoes. Her perfume lingered long after her departure, just like the fear she instilled. The young men she entertained walked on air for a while, but the villagers had learned to count their days. They rarely lasted beyond 3 months. People pretended not to notice, but the unease was undeniable. It was during one of her luxury shopping sprees in the city that Ruth met Damien, a fine young man with caramel skin and a smile that could melt iron. He was ambitious, street smart, and had dreams of starting a tech company. Ruth lured him in with offers too grand to resist. Soon, Damien was living in her mansion, clothed in luxury, his every need catered for. Except freedom, he quickly learned that Ruth's paradise came with invisible chains. Damien was assigned daily chores that would make a houseboy weep. He cooked her exotic meals, massaged her feet, bathed her pets, and endured public mockery when Ruth felt bored. Friends who once hailed his good fortune started avoiding him. Then one day, Damien simply vanished. Just like the others, his family cried and searched, but the silence from Ruth's mansion was louder than thunder. With every new disappearance, a fresh wave of mourning swept over Iziala. The village had begun to suffer emotionally and spiritually. Some began to say the land was cursed. Others believed that Ruth was into something darker than anyone dared to speak aloud. Churches fasted. Native doctors performed rituals, but Ruth remained untouchable. Families who dared confront her were met with legal threats, bribes, or worse, mysterious accidents that kept people silent. One mother who protested too loudly was hit by an untraceable car and spent weeks in a coma. Another man who tried to sneak into Ruth's mansion disappeared as well. Fear took root like a plague. The people knew something sinister was happening, but no one had the courage or evidence to expose it. Then came Ima, young, handsome, and hungry for a better life. He had come to the city with dreams in his eyes and barely enough to eat. When he first met Ruth at a charity gala she hosted downtown, he had no idea that his fate was about to change or end. Ruth had been drawn to him immediately, not just because of his looks, but because of the innocence in his eyes and the desperation she could smell a mile away. That desperation made him perfect. Ruth liked them vulnerable, easy to control, easier to silence. Within weeks, Ima was living in Ruth's mansion. She introduced him as her new personal assistant to her staff, but in private, she called him her sweet little toy. Ima, dazzled by the world he now inhabited, didn't care. Every day brought new clothes, new gadgets, and access to wealth beyond his wildest dreams, but the shine wore off quickly. Ruth's demands were relentless. She woke him up at 3 a.m. to wash her cars. He was forbidden from making personal phone calls without permission. She made him wear embarrassing outfits at public events, reducing him to an ornament, a joke. And when he dared question her one night, just once, she slapped him so hard he bled. But the next day, she gifted him a Rolex and took him on a yacht cruise as an apology. That was how she worked. Abuse followed by lavish distraction. It kept her sugar boys confused, addicted, and silent. Months passed, and Ima started to fade. The light in his eyes dimmed. Then, one day, he was gone. Just like that. No note, no goodbye. When his sister tried to reach him, Ruth said he'd traveled to South Africa for a business opportunity. But no one ever heard from Ima again. No one ever would. After Ima's mysterious disappearance, whispers began to flutter around Ruth like shadows in the dark. But she didn't care. If anything, she became bolder. A few weeks later, she appeared at a fashion awards ceremony with a new man at her side, Charles. Tall, chocolate-skinned, and with a jawline that could slice glass, Charles was a budding model trying to make a name for himself in the village. He had no powerful connections, no stable income, and no idea what happened to the man who stood in his shoes just weeks before. To Charles, dating Ruth was his big break. She took him from magazine covers to billboard campaigns in record time. Her money opened doors for him in the fashion industry that would have remained forever shut. But like Ima, he had no clue that he had signed an invisible contract the day he entered Ruth's orbit, a contract of submission, silence, and suffering. Then, just like Emma, Charles vanished. Ruth claimed he had been offered a modeling contract in Milan and had flown out suddenly. But no agency could confirm this. His phone line went dead. His family grew worried, but Ruth's lawyers handled them swiftly. She paid off Charles's sister to keep quiet and threatened the others with lawsuits. No one dared dig further. The fourth was Somto. Somto was different. Unlike Damien, Ima, and Charles, he wasn't starry-eyed or naive about the world. A street-smart university graduate struggling to find a decent job, Samto knew the game before he played it. Ruth's lavish lifestyle was a siren's call that many in the city found hard to resist. He wasn't blind to her reputation, but the promise of wealth and security blinded many, and Samto was no exception. Ruth brought him into her world with the usual parade of luxury: designer clothes, expensive dinners, and trips to exotic destinations. But Samto quickly learned that Ruth's generosity was a double-edged sword. Behind the glittering nights and champagne toasts, the man she presented to the world was a different creature behind closed doors. Samto found himself trapped in endless chores, cleaning the mansion from dawn till dusk, catering to her every whim and obeying her harsh commands. Despite the humiliation, Samto kept his silence. He knew the rumors of the missing sugar boys and the growing fear that surrounded Ruth, but he told himself that he could outsmart her. He had to, for his own survival. But Ruth's cruelty only intensified. She would berate him publicly for the smallest mistakes, order him to run meaningless errands, and at times locked him inside the mansion for hours as punishment. Yet, every time Samto thought of leaving, Ruth would dangle some new promise of favor and riches, then slap him back into his place with cold words and sharp looks. Weeks turned into months, and Samto's once bright spirit began to dim. Then one night, during a lavish party, he disappeared. No one saw him leave. No phone calls, no texts, just silence. The city whispered louder now, and Ruth's empire of fear grew, untouchable and unchallenged. Kelvin was not like the others. He came from a broken home in the neighboring town of Umachu. With a dying mother and 4 younger siblings, Kelvin carried the weight of an entire family. When news of Ruth and her lavish gifts reached him, he saw an opportunity. But unlike other men, he didn't see pleasure, he saw a mission. He would play her game, earn her trust, and uncover the truth. For his family, he had nothing to lose. He made himself visible, attending events Ruth frequented, helping her staff with chores at public functions, and finally, staging a daring act of heroism by stopping a thief from snatching her handbag during a city gala. Ruth took notice. She invited him for lunch. By the end of the week, Kelvin was in her mansion, given a new wardrobe and a personal car. The trap was set, but by whom? Kelvin knew he had to be careful. Ruth was intelligent, manipulative, and observant. He couldn't afford to make a wrong move. For the first few weeks, he played his part, charming, obedient, and affectionate. Ruth was pleased. She paraded him like a trophy and gave him everything he asked for, except his dignity. But Kelvin was watching. He noticed the security cameras inside her mansion weren't just for safety. They were positioned to monitor servants and guests. He also discovered a door in the basement that was always locked, and no staff ever spoke about it. When he asked, they looked away and mumbled excuses. Kelvin marked it as the first piece of the puzzle. Kelvin's nights were sleepless. Every creak of the mansion's old wood, every flicker of light in the corridor sent his heart racing. One night, he heard faint cries, muffled, haunting sounds that drifted through the vents. He followed the noise, tracing it to the locked basement door. He pressed his ear against it and heard whispers, chanting, sobbing, and the sound of chains. Determined to investigate, Kelvin befriended one of Ruth's longtime staff, a cook named Mama Ifoma. At first, she was reluctant, but one evening after a few drinks, she confessed that strange things happened in the mansion. "That woman is not ordinary," she whispered, eyes wide. "Many boys enter that basement. None come out." Armed with new resolve, Kelvin began to document everything. He planted a small recording device under Ruth's favorite chair. He backed up all files to a cloud drive using a secret phone. He knew time was running out, and his moves had to be flawless. It was on a stormy Thursday night that Kelvin made his first attempt to access the forbidden room. He had memorized the guard shifts and waited until the mansion fell into its eerie silence. Using a bent fork he had hidden in his shoe, he picked the outer lock. But when he tried the second door deeper into the basement, he was shocked to find it made of reinforced steel. The strange symbols etched into its surface gave him chills. As he leaned in to listen, a deep groan came from behind the door, a sound like 100 souls weeping in sync. His hands trembled, but he kept steady. Suddenly, he heard footsteps from above. He quickly relocked the outer door and slipped back to his room just as Ruth strolled by in her silk nightgown. She eyed him with suspicion but said nothing. Kelvin knew she was watching him now more closely than ever. Ruth began to test Kelvin, perhaps sensing that he wasn't just another toy. She gave him contradictory instructions, demanded his presence at odd hours, and summoned him to lavish trips with almost no warning. On a yacht in the middle of Lagos Lagoon, she looked at him and said, "Do you believe in gods, Kelvin?" He paused. "The living or the dead?" She laughed, a sound that echoed like a blade striking glass. "You'll learn soon enough." That night, Ruth showed him an old medallion wrapped in animal hide. "This," she said, "is the source of my strength. My boys are not just lovers. They are vessels, offerings. Without them, my wealth dies." Kelvin forced a smile, concealing the terror surging through his veins. He now had confirmation. She was sacrificing them. But he needed proof, not just confession. The cook, Mama Ifoma, had grown fond of Kelvin. One afternoon, she handed him a small brass key. "I'm old and tired," she whispered, "but maybe God sent you for a reason. I found this years ago when cleaning Ruth's room. I knew better than to ask questions." Kelvin hugged her tightly. The key was unlike anything he'd seen, decorated with strange carvings and bone inlays. He tested it that night and found it fit the second door's keyhole. Inside, he uncovered what no one had ever lived to reveal. The room was a chamber of horrors. Bones stacked in shelves, jars of preserved organs, blood-smeared walls, and in the center, caskets with the corpse of her past sugar boys. There were names scratched on the ground: Damien, Somto, Charles, Emma, all etched in blood. Kelvin nearly threw up. He snapped pictures with his secret phone, wiped his prints clean, and locked the door behind him. He had what he needed, but how to get it out? Ruth sensed the change. That evening, she called all the staff into the main hall and fired 3 of them on the spot for looking too curious. She paced like a lioness, eyes blazing. "There is a traitor among us," she announced, "and traitors don't get second chances." Kelvin kept his expression blank, but his heart pounded. That night, he hid his secret phone inside Mama Ifoma's flour sack. He needed to get the files out, and she was the only one he trusted. Later, Ruth visited his room. She straddled his bed, eyes cold and distant. "Are you loyal to me, Kelvin?" she asked, fingering the medallion around her neck. "With my life," he lied, clutching the sheets tightly. She kissed his forehead. "Good, because your life depends on it." Mama Ifoma had passed the phone to her nephew, who worked at a cyber cafe. He uploaded the files anonymously to a blog known for exposing corruption. Within hours, the photos went viral. The tags read, "Isiola's Black Widow exposed," "Ruth's House of Death," and "Missing Boys Mystery Solved." Ruth's mansion erupted in chaos. Sirens screamed down her estate. Kelvin pretended to be shocked, joining the staff in panic. But Ruth didn't run. She walked to the gate barefoot, her red robe trailing behind her. "You think this is over?" she screamed at the approaching police. "My gods don't die in the face of your machines." But this time, even her money couldn't save her. She was handcuffed and dragged away as villagers watched from afar, stunned and shaken. The courtroom was filled to capacity. Families of the victims wept openly. Some shouted curses. Others just stared at Ruth with tearful eyes. Ruth looked different, her power gone, her skin pale, her eyes hollow. The prosecutors presented Kelvin's photos, the testimonies from Mama Ifoma, and forensic evidence from the chamber. Ruth's lawyers tried to argue mental instability, but the court wasn't moved. When Ruth finally confessed, the silence in the room was deafening. "Yes," she said, "I did it. I gave them up for my strength, for my kingdom. You call it evil, but you all fed from my wealth. Even your children came to my parties." The judge sentenced her to life in solitary confinement. No visitors, no wealth, just the echoes of her victims to keep her company. After Ruth's arrest, her properties were seized by the state. The families of the victims were compensated. Her mansion was torn down and replaced with a memorial garden bearing the names of the missing boys. Kelvin was hailed a hero. The village offered him land and titles, but he declined most honors. "I did what needed to be done," he said. "I just hope the boys rest in peace." Mama Ifoma moved in with her daughter and lived her final years peacefully. The village slowly healed, though the scars remained. Kelvin started a foundation in the victims' names, offering scholarships and vocational training for young men in the region. He named it the Ruthless Foundation, a play on words and a warning. He also wrote a book about his experience, which became a bestseller across Africa. In interviews, he never smiled when asked about Ruth. "She was a monster," he often said, "but monsters don't hide forever." He built a small house for his family in Umachu. His mother recovered, and his siblings all returned to school. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Months later, Kelvin received a letter from Ruth in prison. It read, "You were my greatest failure, Kelvin. I saw your soul before I saw your face. I wanted to break you, but you broke me. There's still one thing you don't know. Something under the garden." The letter ended abruptly. Authorities later searched under the memorial garden and found another chamber with even more remains. The final count of victims reached 22. The garden was reconsecrated and sealed with a priest's blessing. The village held a candlelight vigil. No one spoke Ruth's name again. Years passed. The legend of Ruth became a story parents told their children, to beware of easy riches, to trust their instincts, and to stand for truth, no matter the cost. Kelvin's foundation expanded into multiple countries. His siblings became doctors, engineers, and teachers. He lived quietly, away from the spotlight. But every Easter, he visited the garden, laid flowers by the marble plaque, and whispered names into the wind. For the boys who never got to grow old, Kelvin remained their voice, their justice, their light. Though Ruth had been gone for years, her influence lingered. Strange rumors began to swirl of young men going missing in distant cities. Some whispered that a disciple of Ruth had picked up her mantle. Others believed her spirit had found a new host. Kelvin began receiving anonymous letters. Each bore a red wax seal, Ruth's signature from her old correspondence. The contents were cryptic. "Justice is a cycle. The altar breathes again. It never ends." Kelvin refused to be paralyzed by fear. Instead, he partnered with regional police units and anti-cultist groups, lending his expertise in uncovering ritual crimes. His foundation became a hub for intelligence gathering and support. But deep inside, Kelvin knew the story wasn't quite over. Evil had roots, and some grow deeper than one generation. A chilling case in the city of Onitsha drew Kelvin's attention. 3 boys had vanished, and witnesses spoke of a wealthy woman known for extravagant parties and secretive behavior. Kelvin traveled there discreetly and began an investigation. To his horror, he found signs eerily similar to Ruth's early practices. Animal bones buried near the home, red markings on the walls, and servants too scared to speak. Kelvin infiltrated the woman's circle, pretending to be an investor. He found no physical evidence, but a gut feeling told him this woman was a copycat, dangerous, and inspired by Ruth. Before he could act, the woman vanished. Her mansion was burned to the ground, and police found no trace of her. Kelvin was too late, but he made a vow he would keep hunting, keep exposing. For Ruth may have fallen, but her darkness had spread. In therapy sessions organized by the foundation, survivors began opening up. One man revealed he had escaped Ruth years ago by faking his death. His story was harrowing and matched much of Kelvin's findings. Kelvin wrote his second book, Echoes of the Altar, focusing on testimonies, patterns, and how communities could protect their young men. Schools and churches began using the book in teachings, using Ruth as a cautionary tale. For Kelvin, the mission was bigger than revenge now. It was about protection and legacy. He dreamed often of the garden, of voices calling out in gratitude. He found comfort there, under the whispering trees. One night, Kelvin received a visitor, a young boy named Chima. He claimed his elder brother had gone to work for a wealthy woman and never returned. The police dismissed it, but Chima had found a necklace in the bush, a necklace Kelvin recognized from Ruth's chamber. Kelvin took the case personally. He traced the address Chima gave and arrived at a remote estate, eerily quiet and fortified. With police backup, they raided the estate. Inside, they found cages, ritual tools, and a terrified group of young men. Chima's brother was among them. The woman was arrested. Another cult dismantled. A guard from Ruth's prison called Kelvin. Ruth had died quietly in her cell, but her last words were haunting. She said, "He will carry the fire next. I see him in red under the moon." Kelvin didn't understand it, but he wrote the phrase down. Perhaps it was a warning, or a prophecy. Either way, he would remain vigilant. He attended her burial. Only prison officials were present. No family, no tears, just a nameless grave. The chapter was finally closing. Kelvin was honored by the national government with a Medal of Courage, but instead of giving a speech, he stood silently at the podium, holding a candle for every boy lost. He returned to the garden that night and lit 22 candles. Each flame danced in the breeze like spirits finally freed. Kelvin began mentoring young activists. He trained them in ethics, investigation, and courage. Truth, he often said, is not always safe, but it saves. Among his mentees was Chima. Brave, eager, and determined, Kelvin saw in him a flame that could not be extinguished. He passed him Ruth's last words. "If I'm ever gone," he said, "remember this." The garden became a sacred site. People visited daily. Some to mourn, others to learn. It stood as a testament to justice, sacrifice, and the cost of silence. Kelvin often stood beneath the old Iroko tree, eyes closed, lips moving in prayer. He wasn't religious, but he believed in remembrance. That was his religion now. Kelvin grew older, his hair grayed. Wrinkles marked his face, but his eyes remained sharp. He continued his work, though at a slower pace. He wrote his third book, Shadows and Light, My War Against Ruth and Her Legacy. It won international acclaim. He didn't care. All that mattered was that the truth remained alive. One morning, Kelvin died peacefully in his sleep. On his desk were the names of 22 boys, a candle, and Ruth's medallion, now broken in half. The village mourned. The country honored him. Chima, now a grown man, took his place. And so the torch passed, not to continue war, but to protect peace. Ruth's reign was over, but justice lives forever.
When wealth is built on the pain of others, it never lasts. No matter how powerful evil may seem, truth and justice will always find a way to shine through. Let this story remind us, what we gain through darkness, we lose in the light. What's the lesson you learned from this story? Drop it in the comment section because I will like to read them. And guess what? I have another amazing story coming up soon, so subscribe and join Firelight Tale family so you will be the first person to watch it when it drops. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate